Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of the Cuphead show. Okay, so I should mention this. This seems to be a trend lately, but similarly to Inside Job. Well, I guess not really in Cuphead show's case, because as far as I know, it's still got a conclusive ending that kind of feeds directly into the events of the games. But someone did. It's Cuphead show, technically speaking, is canceled, but also technically isn't. It got through all the episodes that were ordered. Netflix gave them the money that they needed to finish the show they wanted to tell. Although the creators of the show have openly admitted that there were a lot of other characters in other shows that they could have expanded on, they could have made more episodes out of, and Netflix just did not give them the money for them. So I'm curious as to whether or not they'll continue the Cuphead show going forward. But from what it is, the show kind of ends where the games begin. So yeah, it's kind of a setup as a prequel. But in case going into the news, we do actually get yet another boss get their story expanded on in this episode. We meet Baroness von Bonbon, and her episode is her episode Sweet Temptation is it's about self-control. That's what the episode is. But in case the episode then proceeds to open up with as we find out, Cuphead and Mugman are returning back to the room, and Mugman is bitter over the fact that Cuphead, and understandably so, because as we find out, Cuphead shoved a lick firecracker down Mugman's pants because he thought it'd be funny, and obviously it was not, because Mugman wound up hurting himself in the process. And but he does point out that after that ordeal, Mugman points out that he kind of deserves a bit of a treat. But specifically mentions that's a treat for himself, and tells Cuphead to turn around and not show him. And Cuphead reluctantly does. At which point Mugman then proceeds to pull out his thing of Halloween candy, which Cuphead eventually turns around and notices, and because obviously he doesn't have the self-control for that, and obviously this entire episode is about self-control, but he's actually visibly shocked that Mugman still has Halloween candy left, pointing out that it is December, almost a year later, and does wonder how Mugman could still have Halloween candy after all this time. And Mugman then proceeds to point out that it merely takes self-control, something that Cuphead seems to be lacking. At which point he puts his candy back from under his bed, and then proceeds to take his one piece of candy that he takes out down so he can savor it. And he makes a big deal of taking out a plate, knife, and fork, cutting it in half, and eating it piece by piece. However, while Mugman is doing that, Cuphead, and this is very accurately displayed, but very well displayed by the animation that the team made. But while Mugman is down in the kitchen eating his piece of candy, Cuphead is upstairs very ravenously consuming the rest of Mugman's candy like a wild animal. And the animation does a really good job of portraying that. So when Mugman comes back upstairs, he discovers that Cuphead has actually eaten the rest of his candy and is understandably upset with Cuphead for not exercising self-control. And when Cuphead realizes what he's done, he asks Mugman to forgive him, and pointing out that he'll do anything. At which point, Mugman then proceeds to kick Cuphead out of the house, telling him to not come back until he learns some self-control. And of course, at this point where Cuphead then proceeds to wander through the woods alone, and then points out that self-control is stupid, and he wish he could just learn how to do it. And it's at this point where he sees a giant peppermint just roll by, and Cuphead observe it, noting it's very beautiful. At which point he follows it into a tree hollow, where he then discovers Sweetland, which he then discovers. Well, it's specifically Sugarland, but he goes into Sugarland, and he notes that it's trees as far as the eye can see. But And of course, he starts looking around, but it's at this point where, and of course, he notes that all the candy and how delicious all of it looks. But it's at this point where we're introduced to Baroness von Bonbon, and Cuphead picks up on pretty much immediately that she's a little unhinged, and she is. But she then proceeds to appear. She proceeds to appear and introduces herself to Cuphead, and then proceeds to tell him that he can have all that today's his lucky day, and that he can have all the candy he wants. But of course, it's at this point where he then proceeds to point out that where he then proceeds to completely turn around and go and run and try to leave. And when the Baroness asks where he's going, he then proceeds to point out that he's read the fairy tales. He knows exactly how this ends, with him eating all of her sweets and then getting locked in an oven. And he says that the thanks but no thanks. But of course, the Baroness points out that he actually wouldn't even dream of eating him, and pointing out that she only eats sweet treats. And then makes a big display of showing him a cupcake that she kisses on the head and then promptly consumes. At which point she then tells him that she then actually praises him for resisting her temptation to eat all of his sweet treats, noting that obviously any disgusting children that come there would normally eat their fill in candy as soon as they go in and try to eat anything. But of course, Cuphead does kind of appreciate that he has been trying to practice self-control a little bit, pointing out that he's been trying to do that, and of course she then proceeds to point out that he doesn't have to worry about self-control much here, pointing out that he'll be fine as long as he only follows 2 rules. The first rule of which being that he can't tell anybody else about Sugarland. He has to keep it to his lonesome and is not allowed to tell anybody. And the second rule is that he's not allowed to eat her castle, which not even the teeniest bit. And of course he then proceeds to point out that he doesn't really have to worry about that, wondering why anybody would want to eat their castle since there's plenty anything else to eat there as well. He would never have to eat her castle. But she even points out that it is definitely an obvious problem, pointing out that it is quite delicious. And does point out that he might be tempted to eat it anyway. At which point he does lock eyes with her castle and does note that it does look pretty delicious. But then shakes his head and quickly realizes that no, he has to stay focused. He has to not eat her castle, and immediately runs out through the tree that he came in through. And of course he then proceeds to, and then she becomes upset, pointing out that he'll be back. But at which point he then proceeds to run out of the tree and realizes that he didn't really eat any candy while he was there. And to this point where he realizes that he has finally exercised some self-control like Mugman has asked him to, and immediately runs back to the house to tell Mugman what happened. And of course he goes back to tell Mugman about how he went there and didn't eat any candy, although he's not specifically mentioning that he was in a place that was made of candy, but of course he quickly notices that Mugman is still upset at him. And Mugman, of course, points out that he is still very upset because obviously Cuphead ate all of his Halloween candy, and obviously Cuphead is going to have to make up for that by replacing every single piece of candy that he ate. At which point Cuphead points out that he'll be able to pay that back in spades, but then remembers and is about to tell Cuphead Mugman about Sugarland, but then covers his mouth and decides against it, remembering the Baroness's words about how he's not allowed to break that rule. And of course Mugman eyes him suspiciously, wondering who he is and what he's talking about, and he does point out the Baroness did say not to tell him anything about that, and the Baroness does present, and of course that only makes Mugman more suspicious and wondering what he's talking about, and then Mugman implying that a place like that exists, but also that there isn't a place like that, but she points out that as long as they don't run into the Baroness, it should be fine, and he then proceeds to tell Cuphead about Mugman about implying that if there was a magical place made entirely of candy, if Mugman would want to go with him, and Mugman kind of doesn't believe him at first, pointing out that if Cuphead expects him to believe that there's an entire place made of candy, but when he actually sees Sugarland, he quickly realizes that the Cuphead wasn't lying, and Cuphead tells him that of course asks Mugman if he forgives him, and he tells Cuphead that he does. At which point they then proceed to eat their fill and candy, with Cuphead pointing out that as long as they don't encounter the Baroness, they should be fine. And of course, it's at this point where the two of them then proceed to eat their entire fill of candy to the point where they become visibly lethargic and have distended bellies. But of course, once they've had their fill, it's at this point where Cuphead points out that they should probably get out of there, pointing out that he broke rule number 1 by telling Mugman about Sugarland, and then sluggishly points out that Mugman is breaking rule number 2 as they speak, but then realizes what he said, turns around, and discovers that Mugman is in fact eating the Baroness's castle, which is rule number 2: don't eat the Baroness's castle, And he then tells Mugman not to eat the castle, but Mugman insists that it was only a teeny weeny bit. And at which point the Baroness appears and is gleeful about the fact that they've both broken a rule. While Mugman points out that she doesn't seem that unhinged, it's at this point where the Baroness points out that the Baroness starts laughing maniacally, and then Mugman finally sees it. But it's at this point where the two boys start cowering and quickly realize that it seems like now the Baroness is going to eat them. But the Baroness then reasserts that she's not going to eat them, pointing out that she only eats sweet treats. And of course, Cuphead and Mugman feel like that means they're in the clear until they start turning into candy. Starting with Cuphead, who slowly turns into a gummy bear, and then Mugman, who turns into a giant gingerbread man. And now stating that now she can eat them, pointing out that now they're delicious. Pointing out that the Poinsett then proceeds to wake up her castle, Whippet Cream Puff, who then proceeds to chase after them. And from that point, the episode then proceeds to devolve into the boss fight from the actual video game, where Baroness von Bonbon proceeds to chase them through Sugarland on top of her castle, and while Cuphead and Mugman try desperately to run away from her. At which point Cuphead and Mugman quickly realize that they're doomed and that they need to get the hell out of there. At which point Cuphead sees the giant peppermint that he saw when he first came to Sugarland, and realizing he has an idea, he then proceeds to stick himself and Mugman to the thing so that they can escape. And of course they then proceed to make their way to the tree rather effortlessly. But because it was made specifically to accommodate maybe one person coming through or the peppermint, and not both, they wound up getting stuck on the edge of the tree and fall off. And so this point, but of course, since they're close enough, Cuphead immediately makes a beeline for the tree. But Mugman is currently having trouble standing up because he's currently a gingerbread man. Gingerbread men are flat; he can't really stand up on his own. At which point, Mugman tells Cuphead to go on without him, and Cuphead initially considers it, and Mugman then yells at him for it, and Cuphead does come back and helps rescue Mugman, and they eventually gets him to stand up and accidentally pushes them over, while the Baroness is currently chasing them down, and eventually the castle does pounce at them, which causes a shockwave of frosting that just shoves them out of Sugarland and back to their house. And the Baroness and Whippet Cream Puff are disappointed that they got away, but the Baroness points out that they'll be back and that they always come back. At which point she gleefully cackles to herself once they're gone. And it's at this point where Cuphead and Mugman, having made their way back to the bedrooms, then culminate on the lesson they learned today about how obviously they've learned a very important lesson about self-control, and that's now they're back in the house where they're mostly safe and sound. Although Mugman does point out the fact that they're made of candy and that it's probably not safe for them either way. But Cuphead points out that's true, but also points out that it's probably going to be fine since obviously there's nothing in the house that's going to eat them. But then Cuphead winds up being proven wrong when Elder Kettle sees them and instantly tries to eat them. So yeah. That's the same case. That's essentially what the story is for this. Yeah, this episode overall is about self-control. You need to learn. Obviously, it's very tempting to eat that sweet piece of candy or whatever the hell that you're trying to eat. But you need to learn self-control. You need to not eat things that are there, rather than and just learn not to overeat and things and all those other things. It's about self-control. That's what the episode is. It's about It's about not eating. It's about knowing when not to eat candy, specifically, especially even though you really want to. Case in point, Cuphead exercises self-control until he has to tell Mugman about the candy, and Mugman kind of loses his self-control a little bit once he's in there, because obviously he's trying to make up for the fact that he's lost all of his candy. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. That's a bit of a role reversal in the end, because in the end, it's Mugman who demonstrates a lack of self-control and winds up being the castle, which is what causes the conflict in the episode. So yeah, that's the point. That's the point of the episode, self-control. But in any case, that's gonna do it for today's episode of the Cuphead Show. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks down below. I'll be saying thanks. So check those out. Link is down in the description. And also be sure to go check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check those out. And also be sure to go and check out my page. Go and check out the videos linked in the end screen as well if you want to see more content from me that way. On the top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. For the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So most likely my playthrough of Cuphead. I need to finish Delicious Lost Course now that I'm thinking about it. I'll finish that when I finish Sonic Frontiers, I think. I'll have to shuffle some things around, but I'm definitely going to finish that when I start that again when I finish Sonic Frontiers. So, well, you'll see that very soon. But yeah, that's the entire point of my entire relationship with that game is that I get stuck on something, I take a bit of a break, and then I come back. And there's only a handful of bosses in that level, so in that series. So you know, we'll get through them eventually. Eventually, I need to finish it, but eventually we'll get to the end. But in any case, yeah, that's gonna do it for my review. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.